Welcome to OCD Whisper podcast show. Today, I have a very special guest that's going to be coming on who I interviewed all about inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. So I would love to introduce her. Her name is Catherine Goldhouse. She received her bachelor's degree with honors from Brown University and her master's from Boston College School of Social Work. She acquired her clinical training at McLean Hospital, Harvard Medical School's largest psychiatric affiliate, of an inpatient unit and a division of anxiety and mood disorders. She also trained in OCD Institute, the nation's first and foremost treatment center for OCD, and with Frederick Ardema, who is the creator and leading researcher of I-CBT. Catherine is in private practice where she provides online therapy to adults with OCD in Maine, Massachusetts, and Florida. And she splits her time between a peaceful lake in central Maine and the sunny Southern California desert. So here we go. I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome to OCD Whisperers Show. Today I have Catherine Goldhouse, and I'm so excited to have her because we're going to be talking about all things ICBT, inference-based CBT. So we have some questions for you. We want to know, what is inference CBT or IBT or IBA? There's so many names out there. Can you please tell us, what is it?
Sure. So ICBT or IBT is, I tend to think of it as looking at the story behind your OCD. So whereas ACT and ERP look at the behavior, this is about the reasoning process that you go through to arrive at your obsessions. And so it looks at the story behind things and helps you understand how you arrive at the doubt that you did. What story are you viewing life through that is impacting you and leading you to see things in a certain way? And how can we change that story so that your interpretation is more in line with reality? Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah. I think, as you said that, like a couple of things that come to mind that I know very commonly for folks, there's some confusion. Like when you're saying that, part of what I know comes up is things like, well, am I going to be addressing some of the content of my OCD, right? Some of the kind of obsessions or intrusions that come up. Like, how is that different than kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, so you absolutely do address the content. So with ERP and ACT, there's this concept of intrusive thoughts, right? Like everyone has these weird thoughts, and for one reason or another, with people with OCD, they stick and they make meaning of them. ICBT has a different theory. The theory is that certain thoughts stick because you have an ongoing story that they sort of aggravate, right? So, for example, I might see a beautiful woman and think that she's gorgeous and sexy and all the things, but I'm not going to come to any conclusions about being a lesbian or whatever, because I know my sexuality. It's not a source of, I don't have any stories going on in my head. But if I had another sort of tenuous way of looking at things, for example, what's something, so like for me, if somebody told me that I indicated in some way that I was lazy, that would be a real sensitive spot for me. And so I would be very prone to hearing it in that way. So somebody could say something that implies or not implies that you're lazy, and it might just bounce off of you, right? Because maybe it's not an insecurity that you have, or you don't have a history with being told you're lazy or something. But if I do, and that's a source of doubt for me, I'm going to hear that and it's going to be really upsetting. And I might even hear it, even if it's not the intended implication or even the implication at all. So the content does matter, according to ICBT, because it's about these stories that you have going on in your head. So they aren't just random. And so that's why whereas ACT and ERP, the thinking is you address the behavior and then the thinking will follow. With ICBT, it's the reverse. You address those stories, you address that line of reasoning, the way that you come to conclusions, and then the behavior will follow once you sort of break that spell.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of different things. And I'm sure for folks listening, there might be the kind of this question, well, what's the difference? Because in ACT, for example, right, they talk about doing things that are valuable to you, right? Following things that are important, and that OCD will attach to things that are important to you. But it sounds almost similar when you're saying about, if I have a certain security in something for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe I grew up with that in my life, or whatever other experiences have happened. And so it formed an area where, yeah, there's like my weakness, my insecurity, whatever, my kind of Achilles heel, right? That my OCD then will tend to be more, I guess, drawn to anything related to those topics. So
Mm-hmm.
can you say a little bit how is that different from like the ACT concept of values and living, values-based life, um, and connecting to your values and what's important to you versus here? I mean, it seems like it sounds kind of similar, but it sounds like well, maybe
Yeah.
also a little different. And again, these are areas where I'm pretty sure, people are gonna like,
Yeah,
yeah, like
totally.
what's the discernment?
So it is sort of based on the same idea that you have something that's really important to you that for one reason or another became an Achilles heel. And so both ACT and ICBT kind of hold that it comes from something important to you. The difference is what you do with that. So with ACT, you would say, okay, I really love kids. Being a parent is really important to me. And the idea of being a pedophile would be really abhorrent to me. Okay, how can I learn to accept the uncertainty that maybe I'm a pedophile, maybe I'm not, but what I do know for sure is that I value family, I value being with kids, and I'm just going to have to live by my values regardless of those thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
With ICBT, it says, no. You're not a pedophile. Why do we have to sit with that uncertainty that maybe you are, maybe you aren't? Let's help you realize that you have this vulnerability because you care, not because you might be a pedophile, right? And let's focus on that, and that will then change your behavior. So whereas ACT is like, just sit with the uncertainty and do it anyway. Sit with the fear and do it anyway. ICBT says, no, let's get straight on things. Let's not sit with anything that's not true. And the behavior will then follow that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like that maybe you're aware of like going into this topic, right? This just like opens up a whole other slew
Oh,
of
yeah.
things that people are going to have questions around. So I'm going to ask you because I'm pretty
Yeah.
confident people are probably thinking them. So one is like, wow, what a different kind of thought, right? Because there's so much of the training and conversation is about embracing uncertainty, living with uncertainty. We live with uncertainty in many areas of life, right? But here you're saying, no, let's actually get certain. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between like what does that mean? Uncertainty, certainty, or doubt, or kind of what are those
Sure.
concepts that you're hitting on?
Yeah, I can like hear the collective gasps and
Oh
you know,
yeah. Like, oh, certainty. Wait, what did she just say?
right. So, the truth is we are certain about nothing in life, right? Like, yes, I don't know the sun's coming up tomorrow. I don't know anything. But I don't operate that way, right? I operate with what's called functional certainty. I choose certainty so that I can function in life.
Mhm.
If I were to walk around accepting the uncertainty that the sun might not come up tomorrow, that would be a very different existence than saying, you know what, I'm going to round up and assume that it does. And I'm going to be certain, functionally certain. So I think, you know, one could argue, well, isn't that just accepting that maybe you're uncertain and doing it anyway? And no, it's not, because true acceptance of uncertainty would say, I'm open to whatever comes and I'm going to stick to my values anyway. This is not that. This is saying, no, I'm going to choose certainty because I have no reason to believe otherwise. And it's absurd to believe otherwise. And I'm going to choose what makes common sense so that I can operate in life. Right. So of course, we don't know anything for sure. And yet that's not how I live my life, right? That's not how any of us live our lives. I don't live my life just sitting with maybe I'm a pedophile, maybe I'm not. That's disingenuous. I live my life knowing that I'm not a pedophile, right? And so we don't, in asking our patients to sit with the uncertainty that maybe they're a pedophile, I think ICBT would take issue with that because we don't do that either, right? So let's help people reach that functional certainty.
Got it. Yeah. So it sounds like it's not that you're like compulsively reassuring yourself, but from what you're saying, sounds like you're using the reasoning process to kind of understand why, like where that may be my vulnerability or insecurity might make him out of because I actually really love children or families are really important to me or family values or whatever that is. Or maybe I had a difficult time as a kid in my family. And so now I have certain insecurities and vulnerabilities there. And so now my OCD brain is kind of attaching and attacking to that. But if I actually kind of like connect and kind of reflect on like, well, wait a minute, like, is this something I really want to do? Like, is this something I've ever done? Like, is this even remotely of interest to me? And kind of seeing that, like, well, no, I haven't never done that. I never wanted to do that. Right. But of course, the infamous OCD, but what if you do? Right. So, ICBT then does what with that?
So ICBT, the goal is to help people trust themselves, trust who they are, and trust their senses. So we know that we know that OCD kind of tends to manifest in these times where there's a lot of vulnerability with identity. You know, when you're 19 or 20, when you're at that period of like transitioning from being dependent on your parents to being an adult out in the world, around the time of starting a family or being in a relationship. These are all times where our identities are shifting. And if you, for one reason or another, have kind of, you know, like I'm not even going to say if it's genetics or environment or whatever, but if you have sort of a tenuous identity, what's going to end up happening is that you will be prone to doubting certain situations and reading into them in a certain way. So let's say, for example, I have a story in my head that about myself that I am boring and nobody wants to spend time with me. How I got to that story, you know, is something we can go into. But with that story in mind, I'm going to then interpret the world in a certain way. And if my friend doesn't want to spend time with me, instead of saying, okay, she just doesn't want to spend time with me because she has too much going on, because she's in a bad mood, because whatever else it could be, my story about who I am and about how I assume people see me is going to lead me to believe I've done something wrong. I'm a bad person. She doesn't like me. This all, you know, it all provides evidence to that. So obsessions can be equated with doubts. And so when we look at the doubts, when we look at your series of doubts, what do they all indicate? If you're having doubts like, what if I harm my family? What if I ran over somebody? What if I get angry and lose control? Those kind of, there's a theme there, right? Which is, I'm a bad person who does bad things. Okay, so that's your lens. And if we can take a look at that lens, if we remove that lens and replaced it with a different story, you would have different inferences. You would make different interpretations about the world. So when we look at the what if question, we're looking at what led you to ask that question, right? Why are you asking that? So if you think about ACT and ERP, they look at the conclusion you come to. So rather than what if I ran over somebody, it would be if I did run over somebody, X, Y, and Z would happen. So ACT would target how that would make you feel and being able to sit with that feeling, those feelings. And then ERP would look at those thoughts, or that potentiality. And I-CBT says, wait, why are you even asking that question in the first place? Most people don't hit bumps and wonder if they hit someone, right? And so that's where the what if comes in. It all ties back to this sense of self, the story you've created about yourself that leads you to ask those questions, that leads you to have those doubts, because they aren't random, right? They come from this deeper place based on your history, your experience, whatever it is that has led to this story that got you there.
Yeah. And I mean, again, that is a different concept, right? Because with ERP or ACT, we do see that, obsessions kind of pop in and then you respond to them and then basically everything after follows. And so how can we change your response strategy? And everything you're saying here with ICBT is that we don't even go that deep down that pathway. We kind of really want to catch all the stuff way on the front end.
Right.
I've also heard you say different words like doubts, uncertainty. Can you speak a little bit about that and kind of what's the difference or kind of just what those concepts kind of
difference
mean?
between doubt and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So they're used a lot interchangeably amongst us OCD therapists, but they're actually different concepts. So the way I explain it to clients is uncertainty is about missing information or like a lack of confidence. So I am uncertain about someone's last name, or I'm uncertain of an address, or I'm uncertain about the time this event starts, right? So those are all things that can be found out. How do I find out when this thing starts? Well, I just look it up, or I call the place. Or how do I find out someone's last name? I ask them. Or how do I find out an address? I look it up. There is evidence that exists in reality. And whether or not, for some reason, I maybe can't find out that information, in theory, it exists, right? I don't doubt someone's last name. I don't doubt an event when it starts, right? I don't doubt someone's address. What I doubt are possibilities. Because if I were looking to the real world, I would be dealing with uncertainty. When you deal with doubt, you're looking to possibility and the imagination. And so a what if question is a doubt question. And the issue with doubt questions is that we're no longer looking to reality to get our questions answered. We're looking into the imagination. And when you look into the imagination for evidence, you're limitless, right? When you're trying to find information in reality, you are quite limited, right? Like something has to exist. But if you're dealing with the imagination, anything is possible. And so that's why you see one doubt leading to another doubt, leading to another doubt, leading to another doubt. If you're looking at reality, that gets cut short pretty quickly. Because reality,
like you can have infinite
grounding.
possibilities about like infinite kind of what if scenarios, right? Which we all know for folks with OCD. And I mean, I have OCD myself, so I'd like, for sure, I definitely have seen my own brain go into kind of a spiral of, bazillion different what ifs, or it must be this, or maybe it's that. And you're basically kind of doing a lot of hypotheticals. But like you said, right, you're not actually in the here and now. You kind of get wrapped up in your own mind, if you will.
Right.
So that leads me to,
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say like that's an interesting, right, concept to also talk about, like, what about when, we have people who will say things like, but I feel, right, like I feel a groinal response, or I feel something in my body, or, I did have something happen, right? So I know that occurred. So that's not me just imagining that scenario.
Yeah. So those are a couple of different questions. So to tackle the last one, so I had OCD as a kid, and it started because of an event, because of something that happened to me. And I assumed, again, that was always happening still. It had to do with like eating poison and having to go to the hospital. And I ended up thinking, oh no, what if I touch this and it touched something that touched this, that touched poison? And it was all the time, right? And I could say, well, but I have this evidence it happened, so how do I know it couldn't happen again? Well, do we use that line of thinking for anything else? Like, do we say, I got hit by a car, so I'm not going to get in the car or I'm not going to cross the street because I could get hit again? Or we don't use past events as evidence for them occurring again necessarily, right? Like, because if we did, I mean, that's just not how we operate, right? Like,
Yeah.
we use it very selectively. And there's this concept of selectivity of the doubt. So focusing on, okay, well, why do you use that reasoning differently for this and not for this? And that tells you, okay, this has to do with OCD. This isn't actual evidence. This is information that you're using to support a conclusion you've already come to, right?
Mm.
And then the previous question was like physical sensations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really easy to think that we get physical sensations and then come to conclusions about that. It's the other way, right? We have an idea in our head, we have a story in our head, and then we scan and we notice, and then we freak out, right? And even if it's a very like quick process, it doesn't come out of nowhere and then we notice it. It's the other way. So somebody who is worried about getting a granule response, about someone who's of the gender they like normally don't think of themselves as attracted to, they're going to be scanning their body. Someone who doesn't have that isn't going to be paying attention. And if you're not paying attention to something, you're not going to notice, right? So it sets you up for failure. This story does. Because if you've come to the conclusion, if you've decided how things are going to turn out, you can find evidence for anything, right? Like even with the sun example, I can come up with a ton of quote unquote evidence for why the sun's not going to come up tomorrow, right? Like it set earlier last night than it did the night before, right? So, and that just keeps happening. So how do I know it's going to even like come up at all? And it's been rising later. And you can find evidence in quotes, but that's because you've come to a conclusion afterwards. So back to the granule response. So if you have a fear that something's going to happen and then you scan, you will find what you're looking for, right? But you don't get there. You don't come to the conclusion before finding the evidence if you're going to be accurate, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like going back to what you said earlier, right? Is that you have a story already, or that certain vulnerability, insecurity, whatever, and you have a story about it. And then let's say because of that, now you start to, let's say, be hyper focused, right? When people can start to like be constantly checking, because like you just said, they're looking to see like, is this true? Is it accurate? Do I feel something? Do I not? Or I do feel stuff. And that kind of feeds more and more into that story that they're having in their mind about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, with me, when I was a little girl and I thought I did have to go to the hospital because I ate a poisonous plant, and I got it in my head. The story was, it makes your heart explode. And so afterwards, I was always worried my heart was going to explode because somehow I had ingested the poison again. And I would lie in my bed with my hand on my heart and it would just be pounding. And I'd be waiting for it to explode, right? Like, oh my God, there's my evidence. My heart is pounding. Well, of course, it's pounding because I'm scared, right? But I could use that as, to me, it seemed like very viable. It's physical evidence that something terrible is about to happen. My heart is on its way to exploding. But would I have used that evidence had I not come to the conclusion already? No, right? I found evidence because I already had that story. And if you have a story, it's like wearing glasses, right? If you have glasses that have a blue tinge on them, you're going to see a lot of blue things, right? That you wouldn't consider blue if you had the glasses off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I mean, thank you for talking through these things. I mean, as we know, I think ICBT is inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of getting more traction, and there's a lot of questions, and I think there's a lot
Sure.
of, right, I think misunderstanding of, oh, we're going to, go and start to reason with our OCD logic and kind of do all this stuff, but it's like, it's actually not that at all.
No.
It's about more inquiring about what your vulnerability is that actually informs kind of how you're thinking about things, and it sounds like how you're interpreting things, which then informs kind of the rest of kind of what happens. And so
Right.
it sounds like in this process you're not entertaining uncertainty, which is definitely a big pivot,
Mhm.
and you're not necessarily doing even exposures, it sounds like, or response prevention, are you?
So you don't have to with IBT. You can. The way that I do incorporate exposures is, okay, let's expose you to the situation that you've typically, when you've been in, you've gone into your imagination. Let's get you back in that situation, and so you can practice staying grounded in the here and now.
Mm,
So let's go driving and on a bumpy road or where there's lots of pedestrians. And in the past, that would have just created, it would have fed right into that story. Let's go feel those bumps and stay grounded in the here and now, not go into your imagination. So it's different than trying to induce anxiety and learning to sit with anxiety. No, let's not be anxious because there's nothing to be anxious about. If you stay grounded in the here and now, there's nothing, there's no reason to be anxious. And so that's a really key difference is with the inhibitory learning model, the goal is to have a different relationship with these experiences and to learn that you can have discomfort, sit with it, and it's not going to break you. You'll be okay. With ICBT, it's no, let's not have those experiences if they're based on something made up. Right. So that with
right.
exposures, it's okay, let's go through these experiences that would normally trigger you and practice staying in reality, not going into your imagination.
Got it. Yeah, very, very different. But I think it's very exciting. I mean, I thank you so much for coming on and just talking through this and sharing all this stuff and sharing your own personal experiences. I think lastly, I want to ask you, what's something you would like to leave our audience with in terms of, motivation, words of wisdom, anything that you'd like to let people know?
Yeah, I think thinking about your story and the stories you carry with you, whether you have OCD or not, we all have stories. I have the story of myself as a therapist. I have the story of myself as a dog lover. I have, we just all have these stories. Um, but they are flexible, right? And I have this diagram that I made where it's a bunch of dots and I connected the dots in a certain way. And then I connected different dots in a different way. And both of those both of those are stories, right? And you can pick and choose how you connect the dots in your life and how you engage with the world. And why not pick a story that is more in line with your senses, with reality, than one that's in your imagination? So I guess I would just encourage people to take a look at their stories and realize just how powerful our stories are, and that maybe you're dealing with one that isn't helping.
Hmm, beautifully said. And how can people find you?
So on my website, catherinegoldhouse.com, I have a couple articles up there and I'm doing some training. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me with questions about ICBT. I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, I'm happy to
Awesome.
answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for having